Hey everybody, it's a pleasure to be here. Even if I can't be here physically, I'd love to have visited Argentina again. I had a great time last time I was here. Wish I could be there, but of course that's not to be. So I would thank Diego and Fernando and HL7 Argentina for inviting me to talk to you about FHIR. I hope that you've had a really good connectathon, that you continue to enjoy taking part in the community. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why FHIR, where we're going, trying to give you a wider perspective on the overall FHIR project. So let's go. So let's talk about where FHIR came from. FHIR really came about quite a few years ago now. It came with an observation that healthcare has broken processes. And you know, it doesn't matter where in the world that I talk about or what kind of processes we're looking at, healthcare has broken processes. And it's not because people don't care. Everywhere in the world I go, people care passionately that their part of the healthcare system is running at top, world class. But nevertheless, overall, if you look at the system as a patient, it's full of gaps. People fall into those gaps, and their lives are changed and harmed by those gaps in healthcare. So that was our starting observation, that this is not an easy problem to solve. But it was being solved in other industries. They're being transformed, and IT was a key part of the transformation, but not healthcare. And that was partly because of the IT standards. Now, look, I'll be really clear. There is much bigger things in the world than the IT standards that are wrong with healthcare and the way healthcare runs. But if you're going to fix anything, you've got to start with IT standards because they enable the other problems to be solved. That's my view, and that's the view of the FHIR community. If we can create the right standards that integrate between business to business and consumer to business flows, then we can imagine and deliver a healthcare system that's person oriented. I'll come back to that at the end. But again, IT is a small part of the problem. And actually, it's not really even IT. It's about information management, not technology. It's a people problem. And you need to solve it, and so you can take on the other problems, but the other problems are the really big problems and the important problems. And the observation really started with the fact that it was the web that was changing things. It was changing the way people worked. It was changing the outcomes they could achieve. It was a force multiplier. We wanted to apply that force multiplier to healthcare. And really, FHIR is just the web for healthcare standards. It's an open community. We are open and our goal is to make it easier to exchange healthcare information. Because we're open with open participation using web infrastructure, anybody can be part of it. So we're very dependent on social media as a way to make things happen in healthcare, in HL7, sorry. And FHIR is led by HL7, which is a standards community with a global reach. And HL7 is this pivotal role in the FHIR community. And through HL7, we're deeply connected with the health community around the world, with the standards community, with the vendors. And then that open community produces an open standard. Now, a lot of people focus on the standard, but from my point of view, the community, all of us, you too, we're the really key asset that creates and maintains both the excitement and the standard. The standard is the output of what matters. But nevertheless, we have the standard focused on how to exchange healthcare information. It's public domain, open, right? And so totally free for you to do whatever you want with. And to me, that was a really big deal because, too many of the big standards, they were encumbered by considerable costs and the way they were structured and the way the community worked and the way the processes worked and the cost of using them really favoured large, multinational, wealthy vendors, really made it difficult for participants from not such a solid economic base. Well, that's Argentina, among other countries, made it really difficult to participate. And a key goal for me was to use public domain open standards to turn that on its head, to make it easier to participate if you're from the less well-off parts of the world. And that was key for me. We wanted to use the web APIs where possible, and we use web standards wherever we can through the FHIR standard. But also really important to us was the continuity with existing standards, because everybody has existing records, existing systems, existing business agreements that they have to implement FHIR in the context of those. So that continuity was critical. That's what we set out to build. That's what we've built. People are very focused on the standard, but for me, the community is key. And so let's talk about the community. Looking around the world, this is actually a geolocation of the hit rates on the happy.fire.org. So you can see steady growth over the years. It continues to grow. You see that we've had a bit of a hit this year. Everybody's locked down with nothing else to do. And you can see that we're pretty well spread through the world. It's got pleasing growth in participation. South America, it's a more solid participation and spread than when we last looked at this graph a couple of years ago when I was in Buenos Aires. You can see the big hit on Chicago. We're not really sure what the deal with that is. So Amazon data center in Chicago, not sure. You can see that we're gradually spreading. We're still working on it. We'd really love to see, the same series of dots that you see across Europe in South America. So here I am. Let's build that. And really, for me, it's key that we're open communities so anybody can join. You are part of the community a little bit, at least, because you're here listening to me today. You can be involved in the community as much as you like, all the way up to the kind of involvement that I have, which is pretty much full time, all of my life. The more you put in, the more you get back. And it's just a matter of you deciding how much, where do I want to spend my time? What we do as a community is we produce open standards. It's a really funny thing because the open standards, that everybody owns them. And because everybody owns them, everybody's better off. And so, billion-dollar companies bring us their best people and their best IP, and they give it to us because they realize that they can build a business on it, if not that they own it, but everybody owns it. So then they can rely on everybody having it. And so actually what we build is something that everybody owns and everybody's richer because everybody owns it. It's a form of community treasure. And it's our job is to look after that on behalf of everybody. And so we have a solid foundation, governance backed by the American National Standards Institute. Basically, they review us each year to say that we do what we say what we do, and we record that, and we do that openly so that everybody can participate. And then we just iterate on that to show that not only is that reliable and trustworthy, but actually efficient as well. It produces usable standards. So we have a whole set of activities that we do on a continuous basis to build trust, to build content, to build agreements, to build the community around those. And you're at one of them. And we do connect-a-thons. For me, they're key. We have face-to-face meetings, although not so much this year, teleconferences, email lists. You can read the list, and all of those are ways to participate. We started working in 2011. You can see that we started producing milestone releases, and then gradually over time, our throughput is slowing down as we get to be a bigger community with more weight. and more people, and everything just slows down a bit. And that's actually a good thing. And I want to tell you about how I understand it. I understand that a little bit differently than is widely understood. So here, this is a curve you might have seen. It's a Gartner technology adoption curve, which is widely distributed around the world. Some technologies introduced. Everybody gets really wildly excited about what it could do, and they forget the fact that most problems are actually people problems, and they don't go away, and they get inflated expectations about how well things are going to go, and then they actually try to use it, and it turns out there's a whole other bunch of problems you need to solve, and so they all get disillusioned. But eventually they figure out the problems, and you get to a plateau of productivity. And this is a well-described technology adoption process, but actually it's got nothing to do with technology and everything to do with the way people think. And you can see this year around any number of changes that happened this year associated with, well, the year that we've had. And so that's one way to understand it. People often say to me, well, where is FHIR on this? And the answer is actually it depends on your expectations. Some people have been through the trough of disillusionment and are getting out towards the plateau, whereas other people that I deal with, they think the technology solves all the problems and they're at the peak of inflated expectations. And I'm like, no, the problems are real. Problems in healthcare aren't going away anytime. We can help, but we don't solve all the problems. I've always said, for us, the key is to make the fundamentals in place. If the fundamentals are in place, the trough won't be as high as it might. I think more about how we're going and how you understand the process in terms of this little children's storybook called Scuffy the Tugboat. I was looking before I did this, and I see there was never a Spanish translation. So I'm sure none of you are familiar with this book. And this is really sad because it's a great kid's book. In the book, this little kid with the purple top here, he owns this little toy tugboat, and he plays with it in the bath. And he's like, the tugboat needs a bigger platform than the bath. So he takes the tugboat and he puts it in the stream, and then he loses control of it. It goes off quicker than he can keep up with. And the story is about the adventures of Scuffy. Initially, he's just a little tugboat in a little creek, and he's really enjoying the little creek. But over time, the creek merges with other creeks and streams and rivers and turns into this massive river. And he's lost a little pipsqueak in the river. And here he is on the right, just, going through the port, about to go off into the great blue ocean. And he gets saved at the last minute because it's a kid's book. I think of the process very similar to that. When we first started working on FHIR, it was just a few of us, and we were doing really exciting work. And we were in that little creek, and it was bubbling and fast moving and exciting. And over time, as we've grown more and more and attracted more and more implementations, more and more money has been spent in the community, more and more projects, more and more people involved, everything has just grown really, really big. And it's an inevitable marker of the work. Initially, when we were just creating the standard, it was just a small group of us. Now we're really at the cusp of becoming a widely adopted production standard. But there's FHIR in production in a lot of places, but as yet we haven't really got industrial volume at scale. And when we do, then we turn into that big river, and that's kind of where we are. Well, I will say at this point, when people say to me, well, what comes next? And I did think that there would be a next. Kind of planned on it, actually, that we would be good for 15, 20 years, and then something else that was even better would come along. But what I've realized is this river is huge in its massive volume, and it takes an incredible amount of work to move the real world. And we can only deliver something that's really significantly better than what came before us because we had a way to build a bigger, better community. And that was social media, because social media was created and invented. And now we don't have that. And until there's a new way of doing social media, something revolutionary, it's really hard for me to imagine producing a better standard. It's not that I don't think, I know that there's decisions the community made that were short-term thinking that I really wish we had made differently, but we made what we made. But to make something, better, you need a better community. And so that's the thing to look out for. When you think about where standards are going, look at the community around them, because that's what matters. What is the community doing that will create better content, that will create better adoption, that will create better evangelism? If it's there, then pay attention to it, because that is the fundamental. But even so, I'm proud of what we built. We've done a great job. It's my baby, so of course I think that. But, the attention that we're getting drives that. But still, it's important to understand the limitations of FHIR. It's a committee of committees, our community, and it's built by the committees. And you know that, as I'm sure there's a Spanish equivalent of the English too many cooks spoil the broth. Everybody, including me, has something in the standard that I think is wrong. But that's the nature of a large community making the decisions. You don't get your own decision every time. And so there's that. But in fact, it's the number of participants in the breadth from someone from every country that means that things that you agree on in your own country, your own language, region, or whatever, they won't be agreed to in some other area. And so what we can get agreement to is limited by the breadth of participation. It's both our strength and our weakness. So what that means is, if you get a smaller group of community together, a smaller group of implementers, they can get agreement to more because there's less of them. And so what we do is we have a layered specification. We publish the platform, the base layer, and then countries and implementers build on top of that by adding additional agreements. And we've put a lot of work into making that practical. And you will have seen some of those, or you will see some of those agreements for Argentina, because every country needs additional agreements that you can agree to in your country. We have some in Australia where I live, and we have some in USA, and we have some. I work in many countries helping them build their own local agreements. And the thing that's really important is we didn't set out to be a comprehensive system design. It was never what we tried to do. We set out to be a data exchange standard using web technology. Now, it turns out that lots of people are using it as a pretty comprehensive system design, but if you do that, you should expect to add additional things that the community you'll need that we haven't yet, or we may never agree on, because there's only so much that we can do. So the key is to understand that we build a platform for understanding, but you'll need to add additional agreements always. The idea is we get you closer, not that we get you all the way. And so in that sense, we're not a silver bullet. It's nice, a platform agreement, but you have to agree about everything else. So what I've just said. So some people hear me say that and they say, but standards really worth it? When should you use standards? And I think it's really important to understand that actually standards increase your initial cost of development. And people are shocked when I say that. And it's because typically when you start developing, you've got pretty narrow requirements. You know what you're going to do as your first phase and your second phase. And you try and keep focused to that. Whereas a standard has already been through in all the phases and everybody's participated, and the standard's got all the requirements in it. So you encounter all the requirements before you have the maturity sometimes to understand them. And it's a big learning curve to encounter a full-blown standard when you're just starting. And you need to do some work to make use of that, and it's all expenditure. And so initially it will cost you more to use standards. It's really important to understand that, because I know I looked at standards early on in my career and gone, it's too much work. But what happens when you use a standard is your upfront cost is increased, but you decrease your long-term cost. You get much more. The single biggest deal is you don't run into requirements that you have to go and rework things for because you never thought of them. And you get blindsided by the most surprising things in real life. If you use a standard, someone's already run into it and there's a framework for handling it. So it's much more unlikely that you'll have to rework. Can't tell you how big a deal that is. Over time, your costs are much lower because you spent the money up front. You get more reuse of your work and you get more people who can work because they understand the standard, and you get better quality up front because there's a bunch of implementation and quality tooling. But it's really important when you explain to the person who's making a decision about what money to spend, using standards will cost you more up front. It'll cost you a lot less in the long term. And of course, that's pretty hard value proposition to sell. And so, but you have to be realistic about this. Standards have a cost. And that's all up front. And in fact, that raises a really interesting question for standards, which is the whole point of a standard is to create innovation, but very often the standard kills innovation. And how does that work? And I think about it like this slinky dog. The two ends of the dog can move in different directions for a little while. And the standard the way a standard works is it restricts innovation in one thing to create economy of scale that allows innovation in another thing. So it's a cost shifting thing. And for a while, standards in innovation can go in different directions, but only for so long before the string pulls them back together. And it's hard, you can't tell in advance whether a standard will work out. Standards have the same failure rates as startups. 90% of standards, they don't fail because they don't get published, because it doesn't work that way, but they just don't ever turn into something really meaningful. And so really, if you use a standard, pay attention to the community around it, because that's the actual descriptor of success. Now, I'm going to talk about where we are today. I believe that we're on a precipice. We're looking out at a vista that could be great, but it's incredibly challenging. It's more true this year, but it's been true already. The goals of the FHIR project were to disrupt healthcare IT standards. We wanted them to be more open, more responsive, more modern in their approach. And that's pretty much done. There's still work to go, but it's going to happen. There's still some healthcare IT standards haven't adapted, but they're going to. So we think if that is largely completed, not done, but largely completed, then we wanted to disrupt healthcare IT. We wanted to make interoperability a way of life for healthcare IT vendors rather than an add-on that came later. We wanted to reduce the cost of interoperability, and we've done that by commoditizing some key aspects, and we have reduced the cost by more than an order of magnitude, 90% reduction in cost. But we're not finished here yet. This is in progress. And it's pressure that's being applied by the market to all vendors, saying we expect different behavior. And they are adapting, but it will take a decade. So I rate this as in progress, although it's not yet done. I wanted to disrupt healthcare. Now, I said that we wanted to reduce the cost of interoperability. And actually, people were really worried that would mean that people would spend less money on interoperability. But my experience is that they actually spend more because they get more outcome for the dollar they spend. But now I want to turn and look at healthcare instead of healthcare IT, because healthcare IT is a servant to health. If we want to change health, it's not about IT anymore. So we wanted to disrupt healthcare. And for me, disrupting healthcare really means moving to a person-centered record-keeping strategy. Now, that doesn't only mean patients. Yeah, patients. We need a patient-centered record-keeping strategy where patients have their records. But we also need a person-centered record-keeping strategy for the providers, because what we have now is an institution-centered record-keeping strategy. The institution keeps the record. that serves the institution, but not the provider of care or the receiver of care. So I wanted to move to a person-centered record-keeping process framework, and I want, most of all, seamless healthcare to close those gaps that people fall into. Different perspectives on accountability and what we're trying to achieve and who's responsible for what. So many patients bounce around the system getting told different things in different places because there's no holistic view of what's happening with the patient. Now, I want to be really clear, this is just beginning to happen. And that is the goal that we're going to chase for the next few years, is to get the exemplars and proof of concept that we can change healthcare. IT is just a small part of the problem. And it's those gaps that I've been talking about that are a significant factor in the safety problem analysis. And so we want to break those boundaries down, to stop reinforcing them and to actually focus on what's good for patients or carers. Yeah, I've said that. Now, there's a focus right now on giving patients access to their own data using APIs, and that's across the world. And I know that in some respects, and this is really cool, Argentina is ahead of the game, because I remember we talked about this last time I was there. But from a patient's point of view, not many people really, life is changed by having their own data. What actually changes patients' lives is having their own services. Services that is focused on the patient, and having the data is a precondition for building healthcare services that change people's lives. And I think that distributed healthcare services, virtual healthcare services rather than physical institutions, are the future, and that just got a huge kick along this year. And from an institution's point of view, just give everything to the patient saves you from writing integration after integration, because you can just get it from the patient and give it to the patient. And there's a huge technical debt across the world around sharing. But man, it's a big cultural leap for the institution to let go of the fact that the institution holds the record. So that's not going to happen quickly. So I'm looking at the time and better keep moving on. FHIR is a community and a standard that's a critical infrastructure enabler. And it's really key that it's a community solution for IT requirements, actually information management requirements. Now, we're not a solution to anything ourselves. FHIR doesn't solve any problem. It's a tool for solving problems. Other people need to solve it. We need community infrastructure at many levels. And, in order to have that, you need to have good, solid, open source community that people trust to care for the treasure they're given. That needs stable governance, it needs transparency, it needs civil behavior. Civil behavior it's been under threat for a long time, under assault from some parts of the world for a long time. And I really worry for civil society. And the way that civil society is built is by all of us building it. So I want to finish by encouraging all of you individually to spend some time every week contributing to open community knowledge. Some people do that with their local sports club, that's great. But if you have healthcare knowledge or IT knowledge, I encourage you to build, because we have a huge gap in the health IT space. So join either us or some other community and contribute and make the world a better place. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to be around and online. I'm not exactly sure when, but if you want to ask me questions, feel free. And Diego and Fernando will figure out the details. So thanks very much for listening.